I don't think people have any idea that ChatGPT is keeping all of that information, that it's not private in any way, shape, or form. The government has said, oh, you have to keep all those copies. We might need them for court in the future to know if you're paying your taxes or if you're doing anything we don't like in the future. Not your keys, not your AI. Just like they've learned not your keys, not your crypto, it's the same thing, but potentially even more important. How do I control and have access to my own intelligence that I can own rather than rent from some big company? Stop giving all your information for free to ChatGPT and, use it for yourself.
Hey, Sohejl here. Thanks for tuning in. Real quick before we begin, if you enjoyed this episode, if you learned something, please consider to follow or subscribe or share this episode. That helps us out a lot. It helps us to reach more people and to spread quality education across the space about crypto and Web3. Also, if you're part of a crypto project or represent one and you would like to come on the show or do sponsoring, please get in touch with us. And lastly, everything we talk about today is for educational purposes and no financial advice. Enjoy the show. David, lovely to have you on the TEACHMEDEFI podcast.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
This is going to be a fun one. We're going to chat about AI, decentralized AI. Obviously, as I just said off air, that it's like one of the topics that I currently work in as well with Outage AI. So yeah, just curious to dive into it. Really, I mean, I actually we had this AWS outage recently, and I heard that Morpheus survived it, which kind of speaks for the network, I think. So how did that go?
It was pretty smooth. Morpheus as its heart has this peer-to-peer network where it routes all the inference. And that router is node-based, right? So it's not run by any centralized service. So if you're running a node on Morpheus, then you don't get interrupted when the Web 2 infrastructure has trouble. So yeah, I mean, we've seen more and more usage. One of the community members just released a cool dashboard showing all the sessions of the inference going up every day. But yeah, we've seen a huge change just in the last 3 to 6 months as we've gone from having that peer-to-peer network to adding abstraction layers on top. So Kyle Cohen, one of the community members, created a API gateway, and now you literally just push a button and you can get a API key to use all the models. So yeah, that's kind of really unlocked a lot of demand.
And maybe we start there just to understand what it is you guys are building for anyone listening. So it's Inference, right? So give us a bit of a background on that and why like what's the benefit?
Sure. Well, just like Ethereum had to build the primitives for smart contracts, Morpheus is building the primitives for smart agents. So, what do all agents need? They need to be able to use large language models, right? That's the brain that powers the agent. But they also need access to tools, right? Most of the models aren't very smart by themselves. They need access to agentic tools like, okay, go check the weather, go check, a map, go check a restaurant availability, like whatever. Like there's a millions different APIs and tools out there. And so Morpheus is also building a marketplace for the agentic tools. But even that's not enough. You need access to data, right? And so a user being able to bring their own context, their own memories, right, connected to their Web3 ID sort of makes it a personal AI, right? It's not very useful if the model doesn't have access to your context. And so when you take those elements, you put them together, like, okay, here's context, here's the agentic tools, here's the large language model. It really starts to look like a virtual machine, right? Just like Ethereum ended up building the EVM, right? We think of this as the Morpheus Virtual Machine, and it's built on the EVM. So it's a series of smart contracts. Morpheus, these smart contracts that make it easy, sort of put together all these primitives for decentralized AI. And maybe a good analogy is you're probably familiar with decentralized exchanges, right? And you're probably familiar with something like 1inch, which is an aggregator of decentralized exchanges. Morpheus is at the 1inch level. It's an aggregator of these inference providers. So Morpheus isn't running any GPUs. It's allowing inference providers like Venice or Akash or these different groups that are already running these networks to route usage from the user to the person running the inference and back, right? So think of it as like a router or an aggregator.
Oh, cool. All right. I didn't think about it this way. So, all right. So it brings together. That sounds interesting for one, right? It brings together agentic tools, data, and the LLM, right? So the LLM needs context of the user. So that's the data, and it can access like these tools on the internet to do things, right?
Well, and the final piece is you need payments, right? So
Hmm.
it's connected to a wallet. Now you've got X402, right? And you can instantly pay an agent without having to set up another subscription, without having to use a credit card. You can use stable coins on chain to pay an agent to do something. So the timing is really great. And to their credit, Coinbase has done an amazing job sort of setting up the payment primitives. So it's not just X402, they have a whole agent kit for developers that makes it easy to connect the wallets and do all the permissions. So you never hand the AI a private key. You give it an authorization for a specific transaction, for a specific amount of money, for a specific amount of time. And so they've sort of put all that work in the last 2 years, and it's really starting to pay off. I don't know if you've seen the explosive growth of 402, but there's 100 million AI enabled payments that X402 has done on chain, and most of those have been on base. So a lot of the ecosystem seems to be aggregating there, and Morpheus is in the process of sort of shifting a lot of the smart contract infrastructure onto base because it has all these payment primitives that anybody building agents needs.
Nice. Yeah, we will launch on base as well. This is great to hear. We're in good company, I guess. Um, we should probably chat more about this as well. But all right, so I'm just curious. So you said the kind of it's an aggregator. So you got all these other machines running like VLLM serving LLMs, right? And then you can route there. But what do you need them? Do you need them to run some sort of client of yours? Like what how do you plug those guys in and make sure they also deliver the work that you're expecting and so on?
So it's a great set of questions. The Morpheus node is the software that the providers install. And because it's permissionless, anybody can run it, right? So right now, I believe Venice is the most popular inference provider on Morpheus, and it's because they do a lot of different models. I don't know if you've used a lot of Venice AI, but they have large models, small models, open source models. They're anonymizing Grok and Claude and other closed models, but allowing you to use it in a more private way where it's not directly connected to your identity. And so, Venice is proven a really popular inference provider, and they have an easy to use API. So, for example, Kyle running the API gateway in the community, he can pull from a Venice API and connect it to people requesting inference on the Morpheus network in the agent context, right? And so that's proven really popular as a way to sort of scale access to these open source models, and it's also a lot cheaper, right? We've found in some cases it's like 50% less cost if you're using an open source model versus a proprietary one, right? And the real thing is the open source models have caught up as far as performance goes compared to these proprietary ones, which 2 years ago people said, "Oh, that'll never happen." And here we are. It's happened, right? And so now there's this cool arbitrage where the open source models. I was looking at a study from AI from A16Z. The open source models have gone from like 14% of the market to 30% of the market just in
Oh
the last
yeah.
6 months. And so, yeah, it's really cool to see sort of those things we've been talking about are now coming to fruition.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, I saw a post on X as well, which said like all these startups are using open source models, and not the proprietary ones. Also, cost reasons for sure, like you said, and if quality is good enough, why not? And then you can also do things with the open source models then, which you wouldn't be necessarily. I mean, that was interesting what you just said about Venice and the routings to make it more anonymous to use the proprietary ones, but also with open source you can run them, for example, in trusted execution environments and make it private this way, which we do, for example, and you can give all kinds of more credible guarantees about the service delivery, right? You can give credible guarantees that the exact model was used that the user is expecting, with that hash running inside this TE, and you can verify that this is true. And so I agree that this is bringing a whole new realm of like possibilities to um, strengthening that we actually get what we expect when we use AI, and not some sort of different thing, right?
Yeah, and Morpheus is agnostic. So if you guys are providing TE enabled privacy, that's great. Other people are experimenting with ZK. That seems a little further away, but it's maturing. So there's all these different approaches, and Morpheus treats it like a marketplace, like a reputation. So every inference provider has a reputation on chain. You can see how long their first time to token is and how long the sessions were open when they were providing inference, and that's a really good indicator, and it's something that people can't fake. On-chain transactions sort of are truth, right? Like it either happened or it didn't, right? And so that's a good way to address that. So you need to leverage tools like MCP, right? And that's really become, as far as I can see, the standard for how people are connecting all these agentic endpoints to large language models, right? And we've aggregated, I think, like 6,000 MCP endpoints that people have published on GitHub. There's a great effort in the Ethereum and Base community to put a lot of those on chain. I don't know if you've been following 8004. So this is creating a registry where you record the identity of the agent, the validation of what they do, as well as the reputation, right? Like, did it do what it said it would do? So these three registries are on testnet right now, and thousands of agents have now been registered on chain. So we're going to get to see the real performance. To your point, one of the important pieces is to be able to see, does the model do what it says it's going to do, right? And how well, and what does that turn into, uh, as far as a reputation is really important, right? And so 8004 is one of the standards Morpheus has been contributing to. A lot of the lead contributors are like Nethermind. There's a great group called Chaos Chain that's been sort of leading a lot of the front ends and showing off the registries. And so I think all those pieces are coming together. You've got X4R2 on the payments, you have 8004 on the reputation and the identity of the agent. And so my expectation is that's going to go to mainnet in the next few weeks. So maybe we'll be live before the end of the year or in January on Base and the other Ethereum EVM chains. And so that's really going to give us a solid foundation on which to build sort of truth about how good these agents are, what they do. Does that match the reality of what they say they're going to do?
Interesting. So maybe it's also useful to clarify what is the agent then? Like, is that like a specific MCP server that the LLM can call, or is this something beyond that?
Yeah, I mean, that's how I think about it, right? Models are great in the very general sense, but agents are fine-tuned, narrow, more specific. I take them as an analogy to an app, right, on the App Store. Sure, your phone might be powerful, but you got dozens or hundreds of apps on your phone because you need one that just books your flight on United or books your hotel or calls your Uber, right? And all of those endpoints, they're really front doors to databases, right? They're private information. Uber has a private database of who's the driver, who's the rider, their reputations. Like you can't get that information publicly. So no matter how smart the models become, they are ultimately limited in their intelligence to the data they have available to them, right? And what people forget is 99% of data is private, not public, right? Take myself as an example. I've probably put 1,000 images, let's say, on social media the last 10, 15 years. I have 100,000 photos in my personal cloud, right? Which means I have only published 1% of sort of the information that I have available about myself to the public, and I keep the rest private, right? And that's a good example, but that's true of businesses. That's true of most use cases. And so the large language models are amazing and they're getting smarter all the time, but they can only do something useful for you if they're connected to the private data they need to execute. So I think that's sort of this next evolution is the models are a great start, but you have to have agents for them to talk to. And most, like you're saying, are really using MCP as the endpoint to have that conversation and connect into the data. But then X402, now I have a payment mechanism to go the other way. Like, why would they give me that private information? Well, I'm willing to pay for it. Right. Now we've gotten rid of software as a service, right? That whole model is going to get disrupted by Morpheus and this community because you're building effectively a new app store and it takes payments and stablecoins on chain from the AI without ever having to bust out a credit card or sign up from some service you don't know if you're actually going to use, right? That whole model needs to get rebuilt. I don't know if you know the inspiration for the naming of 402, but it was actually one of the protocol names set aside in the early days of the internet for payments, right? But it effectively never got used. Like just like 404, most people know that one because it's like the error code when the server's not available, right? The website doesn't load. 402 was supposed to be for payments, but there was no internet native way to do payments in the 1990s. I didn't get Bitcoin until the end of the 2009. And then, it didn't really mature to a point where you could do it instantly and for very cheap until recently. So yeah, it's cool to see all these things converging.
That's super interesting. So when you talk about an agent, it's the thing that the LLM plugs into. Is that correct way to to think about it?
Yeah, and the terminology is evolving, right? People are thinking like, what do I call my personal AI? You have Ray Dalio and others calling them AI clones or AI twins. Jesse from Base recently created an AI clone so that builders who want to build on Base can talk to his AI and it will give them a lot of the same advice, refer to them to tools, record the conversation. And if it's compelling enough, Jesse will get a copy of that and he'll potentially reach out and talk to the builder directly. Right. But a lot of conversations are sort of information we already know or have talked about, especially someone that does a lot of thought leadership. If you just take all of their X posts, right, that's a good corpus of information about like all the tools and the things that they're working on. And you can effectively then bring that into natural human language and just have a conversation, but you can talk to 1,000 people a week instead of 10 or 20, right? And that's really compelling. So I think there's going to be a whole wave of people building these AI clones. But what I want is for that to be rooted in the individual, right? Connected to your personal wallet so that you have the key, right? I think people are going to learn over time, not your keys, not your AI, right? Just like they've learned not your keys, not your crypto. It's the same thing, but potentially even more important. Like, how do I control and have access to my own intelligence that I can own rather than rent from some big company is pretty important.
No, but what could that look like in practice?
Well, if I have my private key and I can access any large language model, any agent, it has, access to my private data. Now I effectively have my digital life in a form where it can be connected to my AI. I mean, that's sort of what Morpheus has really built all the primitives for, right? Is this ability for people to act in a way where they're owning the AI instead of it owning and leveraging their assets, right? So think about the difference. Like if I use Morpheus, say I'm using Venice, all those prompts are private. All the information I can store it locally or I can store it in a decentralized cloud. But if my credit card expires, I don't lose access to all of my intelligence that's stored on, if you're keeping it in ChatGPT, one, it's not private. Like, two, the government has said, oh, you have to keep all those copies. We might need them for court in the future. Oh, and, we might ask about it to know if you're, paying your taxes or if you're doing anything we don't like in the future. The idea that you're creating this, copy of information. I don't think people have any idea that ChatGPT is keeping all of that information, like that it's not private in any way, shape, or form. Not to mention they're training their models on it. Whoops, one of our databases leaked. All your information is out there. And it's sort of all the downsides we had with Web 2 is, most of that value flowed to the big tech companies, didn't flow to the individual, right? They gave you a little free app, that maybe they spent $100 a year on, and they took maybe $10,000 a year of your data that you had no idea had any value, right? So I want to flip that equation and have the individual get most of that value. Maybe you're still willing to sell some of it, but you should at least get paid for that information as opposed to the scenario right now where people are sort of being duped and giving it all away. This is for the same reason that you have a personal phone. Like, why do you bother? Oh, your company would buy your phone. No, thanks. Like, I'd rather be able to take my apps and my contacts and my photos and my memories to the next job, to the next thing that I do. You know, I wouldn't, only have a corporate phone, right? Or only have a corporate laptop. People have personal devices for a reason. And I think we're going to realize that they need a personal AI for the same reason.
Okay. And this registry that you talked about, 806 or something, the project? Oh.
8004 is the ERC. So this is an Ethereum request for comment. Basically, it's going through the process where you create a new standard on Ethereum. And right now it's on testnet. And effectively, you can publish an agent and describe it, how it can be called, how it can be executed. And what Morpheus provides as part of this is okay, somebody has to run these agents, right? It's not good enough that you can discover them and there's some code on GitHub. Somebody actually has to run the hardware. So, the Morpheus community is planning to expand the infrastructure from the model, router and marketplace that we've created and support agents as well, right? Because a lot of them are run CPU instead of GPU. So you need somebody to execute this virtual machine that will run the agent to make it available whenever somebody asks for it.
That's what I wanted to get to. So what is actually running there in this virtual machine? Examples. So what are like different agents?
Docker container that has the code of the agent, connections into whatever large language model it's using to call the intelligence to power that agent. It really depends on the agent, but Morpheus is agnostic. You could shove anything into the virtual machine that you want. But the point is that you've now got people competing to run and provide these agents to others, because that's one of the key insights here is most people don't have a GPU. Most people don't have a powerful laptop. The average person globally has a $150 Android phone. And so if you're going to serve most people in the world, those 3 billion people, you have to have something where they don't have to run it locally, right? So it's great that you can run it locally, but we have to have a decentralized option where you can provide the inference, the agents, all these tools to somebody with much lighter hardware, right? So light clients are what made Bitcoin and Ethereum and these other networks successful, right? When Bitcoin it was a peer-to-peer network, it was hobbyists, right? It wasn't until you got wallets and web wallets specifically like blockchain.com where somebody could just go to the website and they could use Bitcoin, right? Most people don't run an Ethereum node. They're using MetaMask or something like that. So we have to have these abstraction layers for AI as well.
Yeah, how does the peer-to-peer routing work? That also sounds interesting. Can you tell me a bit about it? Because yeah, I think you mentioned someone's running an API that then you can just simply connect to and you get your API key, but there's also a different concept, I think, that's more decentralized in terms of the routing of the inference, or?
Yeah, that's the core of it is you're able to access the router as a peer-to-peer node, and so anybody can run a service on top of that. They're just running one of those nodes and acting as one of those compute providers, right? And a lot of developers don't want to run their own hardware, right? And so you need to provide an option where they can use an API key instead. But it always gives people the option to run the node themselves if they want to.
Okay, and if they run the nodes, they can. So it also discovers the other machines that are running nodes.
Yep. It sees a list of all the providers, which is kept on chain, and it gives you an easy way of accessing all that compute. And all of these sessions are set up with the Morpheus token. So if I stake my Morpheus token, I'm able to access the inference from these other providers. And that's really the key. And think about the effects of that. I don't have to constantly pay. The network is doing the payment, right? Because it's a staking for inference model. So I've still got my token. And if I take some of these tokens and deposit them into a wallet for an agent, it'll effectively run forever, right? Because it can keep staking the token to access this brain power to power its functions. And that's really critical because I think people underestimate the importance of persistence. So, if you run a traditional software project and it's owned by a company, the company gets acquired, maybe the big company doesn't really want the product, maybe they want the team, maybe they want the technology underneath, and they shut down the product. Okay, go home, all the users, nobody cares about you, right? You sort of lose access. I'm sure this has happened to you. It's happened a bunch to me. Like some of my favorite software gets acquired and then turned off, right? The reason that doesn't happen in the blockchain world is everything's open source and everything on the blockchain is kept forever, right? Every node has a copy of the ledger, right? So you know exactly how that agent functions, right? It's the information's all right there. And so you can sort of never lose those capabilities. Somebody publishes a smart contract, it's going to be there a year from now, it's going to be there 10 years from now. And so the next guy that comes along who wants to build something on top, like I know Uniswap's never going to go away. Like it's a set of smart contracts. And so I can build something presuming I have Uniswap. And then I can go and build the next thing, presuming I have the Ethereum naming service, right? And all these primitives take a huge amount of effort to build. If you had to build them yourself, you'd never finish the development, right? And so that's why these network effects are so sticky and developers have largely aggregated to Ethereum and Base is because that's where all the tools are. That's where all the other builders are. And they can move 100 times faster because they don't have to rebuild all these primitives.
Hmm. What's the Decentralized AI Society?
So this is a project started by Michael Casey, who you might know ran the Consensus conference for a long time, was chief editor at CoinDesk. Really great guy. Literally wrote the book on cryptocurrency in 2014 called The Age of Cryptocurrency, and used to be on Wall Street back in the day. And so he really said, hey, what we need to do is bring together all of these different groups. And so Morpheus, Venice, others, other chains, MIT, Stanford, all these groups are associated with the Decentralized AI Society. I believe it now goes by the name the Advanced AI Society. And, you know, they're holding a series of events. How do you set the standards? How do you get people involved in this? They host a lot of events around the conferences. So, yeah, Michael's doing a great job with that.
Awesome. That's very cool. Is there something you specifically wanted to maybe chat about?
Sure. There's a lot going on in the Morpheus community. One of the things that was most unique is it's entirely fair launch. So there's no Morpheus company, there's no foundation, there's no DAO. People just deposited staked ETH into a contract and it contributed the yield from their ETH into the project. And the way it did it is effectively it's buying tokens out of the Uniswap pool every day, every block, every few minutes, right? And that sort of got rid of so much of the bureaucracy you typically see with any project, right? You don't need a treasury. It's all automated in the smart contracts. You don't need a foundation. You don't need a bunch of people, running a grants approval process or something like that. It's all decentralized, and I really like that approach. because it lets anybody be part of the project in like a real way. They can earn the tokens, they can talk about Morpheus, they can educate about Morpheus, they can use the software, they can provide inference, and each of these things can be rewarded by the protocol, right? And to me, that's why Ethereum and Bitcoin were so successful is they created these really broad network effects for anybody that wanted to support the project. I use the example of Ethereum all the time. People remember the ICO. People remember, GPU proof of work mining. What they forget is that Vitalik airdropped to the developers ETH in the Genesis block, right? Everybody that contributed code before the Genesis block got rewarded, right? And that created this huge cohort of very smart developers that wanted to build on Ethereum because they were Ethereum, right? They had built Ethereum, they were rewarded by Ethereum, they were part owners of Ethereum. And so that concept is really powerful. And then when I first read the Morpheus white paper, is it talked about rewarding developers and how to do that, not just capital, not just people running computers, but the engineers themselves. And that's, I think, usually the forgotten group. And so Morpheus has got over 300 open source contributors globally, right? Over 6,000 people have contributed the staked ETH. There's been over $3 billion that have gone through the smart contract, which is amazing. It's like the number six globally on staked Ethereum at one point last year. So
Oh
yeah,
wow, yeah.
and that model, that fair launch model, has really caught on. So AO Arweave and Nounspace and others have all adopted this fair launch approach and said, oh, well, we can just use the smart contracts. So people often use the Morpheus smart contract to do that. And the community has recently extended the contract to support stablecoins, to support wrapped Bitcoin, basically any asset on Aave that produces a yield, now that can contribute their stake to Morpheus. So people can just go to more.org, MOR.org, click earn more, and you'll see the dashboard, and you can just stake your stable coins, your wrapped Bitcoin, your wrapped ETH, whatever, to contribute to the protocol. And you then earn the more token.
Okay. So you stake the token, and is the yield goes to the protocol, and you receive the more token for it. Sort of, you're buying it with the yield,
Basically.
right?
Yeah.
Right. And the yield token, let's say I'm staking USDC or something, and then the yield is paid in USDC. That goes to who exactly? That goes then to the team, right? Instead of investing and buying.
It goes into the protocol own liquidity. So the smart contract that's buying the tokens out of Uniswap. And what does it do with those tokens? It burns half and it locks the other half for 16 years from now till the second epoch. So it's constantly creating demand for the more token. The burn is increasing the scarcity of the more token, and the lockup is setting up the block reward for 16 years from now. So there's still rewards long into the future. It's a really cool approach. And because you have no treasury, and you don't have to worry about, you know, managing budgets and all these things, you can just, let people earn the tokens. If they want to buy, they want to sell, that's up to them. But it's all managed by this protocol owned liquidity.
Okay, so the USDC yield goes in, buys the more token
Mhm.
from the
Yep.
protocol.
Yep.
The USDC, 50% of the more is burnt, that is bought.
Mhm. Yep.
Okay, so there's some disinflationary pressure, I guess. And the other 50% goes to the person who had staked.
Yep.
Uh, okay.
So the person stakes, they earn the more token. The yield goes and buys tokens already on the market and burns them or locks them, creating the scarcity. And so Morpheus will have 42 million tokens as its cap, and more than 300,000 of those have already been burned or locked.
All right, I gotta check this out. This is really interesting. So wait, so 50% got burnt, and the other 50% gets returned to the staker, right? Because he bought it with the yield. So what is locked up until the next epoch?
So the reward every day, it's like 3,000 more per day right now, goes to capital providers. So imagine you provided 1% of the yield today. You know, 1% of the 3,000 would be what, 30 more? You'd get those 30 more, right? And so separate from that, okay, now you've got your 30 more and the yield is flowed into the protocol on liquidity. Let's say it buys, I don't know, 15, 20 more with your yield
Oh,
that
now I understand it. Sorry. So that's emissions.
yes,
The first part, there's a bucket. According to your stake weight, you get a share of the emissions.
that's right.
And still, you still have that USDC, and that goes and buys some of the free market.
Yeah.
And 50% of that is burned, 50% is locked for the next. Oh, okay. Okay, now I understand.
It's a cool solution because, Bitcoin has a hard cap of 21 million, but eventually the emissions run out. I mean, not till 2040, 2140, so people don't, think 100 years from now, but eventually the emissions will run out, right? Hopefully fees are high to continue incentivizing the miners, so maybe it won't be a problem. Ethereum has no cap, right? There will always be more emissions, and people don't really like that because, like, I don't know how many ETH there will be in the future, but there's a burning mechanism, and so it kind of keeps the supply from growing too much, right? Supply is lower now on ETH than it was a year or two ago, right? But Morpheus effectively solves this problem because you can have a hard cap, and that 42 million will never change. You can burn some, so the inflation will reduce more and more over time, and in fact, the total supply will reduce over time. But because of that locked portion, those get recycled back in to the next block reward. So it never runs out of block rewards. 1,000 years from now, there will still be a Morpheus block reward continuing to be recycled because of the use in the system drives the token back into the block reward without creating new tokens, right? It's just buying them off the market, right? So it's a really clever solution.
That's clever. So you're building up sort of like a stack of more coins through that mechanism, which then can be paid out to incentivize or to reward participants.
Yep. Capital in the future, code in the future. Exactly.
Oh, really cool.
Yeah. I like long-term projects because, this isn't like a 1 year sprint, right? There was a lot of excitement about decentralized AI in 2024, right? You had the launch of a lot of these projects, the prices went up, the prices went down, you know, and a lot of people are like, oh, well, that was fun. And then they go away. But I'm much more interested in spending 5, 10 years building out all the technology, getting the users, getting the adoption, and building something much bigger, right? And so I tend to filter for projects that have tokenomics that go for a long time. They don't just give out all the tokens in one day or 1 week or 1 year, because the future emissions are the mechanism for future contributors because not everybody heard about Morpheus. Maybe they'll hear about 2 years from now or 5 years from now. They still have an opportunity to participate, right? Just like people hearing about, Ethereum today can still run a validator and earn Ethereum. And the same for, running Bitcoin miners. They can continue to earn the token even if they didn't hear about it in 2009.
But Ethereum is different, right? Ethereum doesn't have a hard cap, and they keep on printing. That's how they pay now.
Yeah. And the burn function, though, on Ethereum has for a while exceeded the emissions. So that's really the usage of the system. So I think about it as you need to go through a bootstrap phase where, you're getting capital and code into the system to create it in the first place. But then over time, the usage needs to pay for all the participants that are involved.
All right, yeah, this is super exciting. I mean, one more thing, because you said like so someone who user of inference, a requester of inference, right? A user of the AI, who gets matched to the compute provider, inference provider. So does he pay them like per million tokens, million LLM tokens, right? Used, or you said something about they just stake and then the network pays them? Is that then paid out of emissions, or like what's the concept here?
So it depends if we're talking about, let's start at the peer-to-peer level. When you stake a more token, you get a percentage of the daily inference equal to that, right? So let's say you stake 100 more tokens. Great. That gives you X amount of, time and inference available from the network to pay the provider. And one of the big benefits of this is instead of making transactions for every prompt or on a regular basis, you can effectively batch them all together. So you just pay once when you stake to the session. You might leave that session open for a week and be calling thousands of different prompts, right? And then you close that session. It creates one transaction on chain, right? Even with the low fees of today, transactions aren't free. Maybe it's a penny, maybe it's 10 cents, but they're not free, right? So if you were doing millions of them, it would become cost prohibitive. So by creating these into sessions, you got one transaction that represents, a day or a week of usage. And then at the end of that process, there's a claim that the compute provider, the inference provider, can make to the protocol. Hey, I'm the one that provided that session. I would like to claim my reward. And the protocol pays them out, right? So you have two options. You can either stake or you can pay directly. So if you're holding the token anyway, you might as well stake it and use the inference. But let's say maybe you don't care about holding the token, or you've got a lot of usage and you don't have enough to just stake. You can pay a compute provider directly, and okay, I'll pay you. They have their prices posted on chain, and they say, oh, it's 10 more for a week or whatever the cost of the session is, and you say, great, you put it into the protocol. At the end of the session, the protocol pays the provider that money. So that's all at the peer-to-peer level. But most people probably don't want to understand how all that works or deal with the token. That's fine. You've got somebody like an API gateway that people can check out on app.more.org. And you can just show up, create a API key, use it, and pay with a traditional credit card, or use dollars, or however you want to do it. But you don't have to sort of learn how all the tokenomics work. And I think most people will probably do that.
Yeah, okay, I get that. That's kind of like you run the someone else is doing that for you, and then no, I get. But the staking part. So you're staking the token, and then you get, I suppose, your stake divided through by the total stake on the network means your percentage of the full inference capacity that you get allocated.
So it does the number of tokens that you have divided by the total number that could stake, right? And so if you're holding 1% of the tokens, you stake them, great. You've got access to 1% really of the emissions that day, because the emissions are paying for the inference, right? And and so let's say the available emissions that day were 3,000, you hold 1%. So you've got your 30 more emissions that you can direct, you can spend as you want based on which sessions you open for which models. And one of the things I love about this is Morpheus basically is neutral. You can pick any model you want, any agent you want. Morpheus doesn't set defaults. It doesn't, create like the lowest common denominator. There's no votes. Like nobody has to vote on which models to support. It's a marketplace. So people can host any model they want and they can use any model they want. And I think that's how it should be.
Hmm. Interesting. So you're staking. It's corresponds to 1% of fully diluted supply, right? Total supply. So you get 1% of the daily emission in more, which could be then, let's say, 30, like 1% of 3,000. And this 30 is your budget to use whatever LLM you want. And those LLMs will have different prices because some are larger, some are smaller, but also depending on the compute provider, they all have set their own prices for delivering the computes for running the LLM.
Right. Exactly.
That's very elegant. That's cool. So, with all these things that we talked about now, where are you at with this? What's the stage of this project? Like, what's the adoption? What milestones have been achieved? What is next? Sort of, just to get an idea.
So Morpheus in the white paper, which was written by some Anons back in 2023, effectively proposed a series of milestones, launching the Inference marketplace, launching the capital contracts, launching all of the rewards for coders, right? And the builder subnets. Like anybody can launch a project on Morpheus, people can stake towards them and get a reward as a builder, right? Who's using or building agents on Morpheus. And so those four pillars, those four marketplaces, if you will, for capital, inference, builders, and code, all got delivered, right? So that's what was imagined in the white paper. Took about 2 years from September of 23, call it till September of 25 to see all of those sort of go live, but also like mature, right? The API gateway, sort of making it easier for people to participate. So I would say Morpheus is moving from a mode of come help us build Morpheus to come use Morpheus. Like it's ready, it's online, it's working, it's secured $3 billion in capital. It's pretty well proven, right? It's supporting all of these users who are accessing the model. And you look at projects built on Morpheus like Venice, they've crossed 1.5 million users, right? That's probably one of the first killer apps in decentralized AI that average people are using. They don't even know it has to do with Web3, right? They're just using something that's faster, better, cheaper, right? And it happens to have open source and, base and decentralized AI at its heart, right? And that's really cool and rewarding to see. And so I think that's the mode. It's like, okay, how do we scale to 10 million users, to 100 million users, right? We need a lot more projects to adopt the technology, to build on it, to see the same value that Venice and other have. But that's really the mode right now.
So, when was it founded?
The white paper got published, I think, early September 23. The paper was written by, they called themselves Morpheus, Trinity, and Neo. Obvious, theatric allusions there. And I think they published it on Keanu Reeves' birthday. And so it's like the Easter eggs that I realized later is like, I see what they did there. But yeah, I mean, when the paper first came out, it really attracted a lot of early Bitcoin and Ethereum OGs because it had no pre-mine, it had no VCs, it had no founder. Like anybody could contribute to it and sort of build it and be, anybody. We're all Satoshi, like we are all Morpheus, right? It's that same kind of ethos that we really like. And you have to remember in 2023, there was all this anti AI sort of propaganda going around. Like the administration has said they were going to ban the open source models. Like, I don't know if you remember that. They were going to, license and KYC the data centers, and no foreigners were going to be allowed to access AI, all this crazy stuff. And the community sort of react is like, you're going to ban math? Like, no, you're not going to ban math. And so I think that's what lit a fire under the Morpheus community specifically. And we held a big event end of 2023 in San Francisco. Keep AI open, right? And that was like, open source is important. Like we shouldn't shut this down. So there was like a whole movement, right? And that's sort of where Morpheus came from.
When you integrate these other compute provider protocols, does that mean you integrate with them on the smart contract level, or is that different? Like, I'm just wondering with the payment. So then, when you stake more, you get a share of the emissions that is used for the payments towards the compute provider. But this is now more. Are the compute providers expecting a different token? Do you have to, like, is that swap to something else and then you comply with whatever their smart contracts are expecting, or is this just like a bilateral different arrangement where you just like they get more and they have agreed to receive that? Like, what does that look like?
No arrangements required. So somebody wants to spin up a GPU from Akash, or they want to connect in the Venice API to provide inference. Morpheus doesn't know or care how they do that. They just spin up a node, provide that inference, and get paid in more. Now, if they hold that more or swap it to something else, that's sort of up to them, right? That's outside of the scope of really what Morpheus focuses on. But swap it for USDC or some other token or whatever. Yeah,
Yeah, right. So it's like other people running the hardware, and whatever way they source it and pay is their decision, right? So if you talk like io.net, it's not like you're integrated with the project io.net, but like people who are renting hardware from them and then deciding to provide compute to Morpheus.
exactly. Yep. So
Okay.
it's permissionless. I couldn't stop somebody from doing it if I wanted to. Like,
Yeah.
that contracts running on Ethereum and Base, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Awesome. David, this was awesome. I mean, I think we could keep going. Maybe you'll come on the show again at some stage and we talk more about these topics. But maybe, yeah, maybe it's about time we wrap a little bit. Is there anything else you would want listeners, viewers to know?
Really, it's simple. I think about this like I think when I found Bitcoin in 2012. It's like I want to be the person that tells my family and friends about this important new thing. Bitcoin was transformative for our lives. The idea of having honest money like was really powerful. And the same for Ethereum and smart contracts. And now it's owning your own AI, right? It's freedom of intelligence is so important. And so, I would just say go to more.org, mor.org, check it out, understand how the technology works. And more than anything, like use it as part of your daily life. Like stop giving all your information for free to ChatGPT and use it for yourself. Right. And so I think that's the big thing.
Awesome. Well, David, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Talk to you soon. Take care.